Deciding whether or not to invest in a game's supplementary content can be a confusing proposition. Just about every modern AAA title has at least one way to spend money on top of the initial asking price. Whether it be a large expansion or a small cosmetic item, the video game industry has become very good at finding ways to part you with your money. It would be nice to think that all DLC is created with the gamer in mind, but the reality is that game companies want to maximize profit margins, and as a result, paid DLC can often be the gaming equivalent of buying snacks from the candy bar at the cinema. To be fair, some DLC is outstanding and is a must-buy for fans. So how do you know which paid content is worth the additional cost? There are plenty of dodgy deals around, and knowing which DLC to steer clear of isn't always straightforward. In this video, I want to discuss the various types of paid DLC, how to spot a good investment, and the ones that you should try and avoid. There are plenty of ways that game companies monetize supplementary content. Sometimes this content is genuinely good, making a great game even better. Other times, it's clear that corporate profit was the primary focus during development rather than enhancing the experience. For the purpose of this video, I'll be focusing on the following types of paid DLC: single-player expansions, multiplayer expansions, season passes, and microtransactions, which can be anything from cosmetic items like an inappropriate outfit for your favorite character, to a level progression fast forward. Single-player expansions are one of the original forms of supplementary content and were around on PC long before console gaming got in on the action. This type of DLC can add depth and longevity to a game through content such as additional story and missions. They often have high production values and can be an excellent way to extend your enjoyment of your favorite game. For some titles, single-player expansions are almost mandatory if you want the complete story, or to experience everything the game has to offer. Titles like Destiny and StarCraft are perfect examples of games with expansions that can be considered chapters or episodes, and while you can simply purchase and play through the vanilla game and leave it at that, it's fair to say that you'll miss out on some of the game's best moments unless you purchase all of the expansions. Some games are episodic by design and have numbered chapters, like Telltale's The Walking Dead and Batman games, making their structure obvious. But single-player expansions are not always clearly defined in this way, so it's definitely worth doing some research before purchasing to know if a game is structured like this. Otherwise, it can come as a rude shock if a game ends up costing you 2 to 3 times more than the initial price for the complete package. That being said, I believe story expansions are one of the safest bets when it comes to getting value for money. Story expansions are generally easy to quantify. Playtime may vary from player to player, but there's usually a minimum amount of time required to complete them. Not all single-player expansions are great, of course, but quite often it's easy enough to find reviews from both the mainstream media and independent outlets to see if it's something you'll enjoy. Multiplayer expansions typically add things like new maps, weapons, modes, vehicles, and characters. Many of these expansions can be good value, but they come with a few important caveats. In many games, particularly in first-person shooters, multiplayer expansions have an expiry. This is due to the fact that they're only playable while there's other people still playing the game. In many cases, the expansion can only be played with other people who have the same DLC. So if no one is playing, this content can be useless. The window in which it's playable will vary from game to game, but even successful mainstream titles can see complete expansion abandonment only a few months after release. So, the best time to buy this type of DLC is right at the start when the hype is at its peak and the most people are playing. It's worth noting that this type of DLC often goes on sale a few months after release, but be wary of discounts on this type of content. If it's been out for a while, you might be buying something that's unusable. Another point to consider with multiplayer expansions is there will almost certainly be a smaller pool of players in game lobbies, and depending on the game, these lobbies can be concentrated with highly skilled players. Die-hard fans and veterans will almost certainly make up a significant portion of the players who purchase multiplayer expansions, and this will result in stiff competition. For some people this may be an attractive proposition, particularly if pub stomping isn't your thing, but for many casuals, paying to get your ass handed to you is less than ideal. Some multiplayer expansions have items that you can use outside of expansion-exclusive lobbies, such as weapons and skins. There are also plenty of DLC packs that provide a strategic advantage. From progression unlocks to weapons and equipment that can provide tactical advantages, some games offer multiple ways that you can pay to win. While I personally believe that anything you can unlock with regular play should be, it's hard to argue that these types of DLC aren't a good investment for anyone looking for a shortcut or an edge over the competition. Microtransactions have gained a lot of traction over the years because they are much easier to develop than large expansions. The lower price also increases the likelihood of players purchasing on an impulse, so it's understandable why game companies focus on creating this type of content over an expansion. Microtransactions are typically smaller in both the scope of content they offer and the size of the download. It's designed to be quickly purchased and installed with minimum impact on game time. A common type of microtransaction which is often controversial is in-game credits, like Grand Theft Auto Online's shark cards. These credits can normally be earned through regular gameplay, but the rate at which you earn them is usually deliberately slow, creating incentive for you to speed things up with real-world money. Grand Theft Auto Online is particularly successful at doing this. The developers have constantly added new, free expansions with plenty of exciting ways to spend in-game money. These have become progressively more elaborate and costly. Microtransactions are one of the most risky types of DLC to spend money on. Again, this isn't always the case, but with so much of this content designed to make a quick sale, it pays to be extra cautious. You can be sure that any system that exchanges real-world money for in-game currency is not a good deal, and I personally steer clear of this type of DLC entirely. Season passes are one of the worst deals when it comes to paid content. On one hand, they provide a saving for buying all of the game's major content updates at once, and they often include incentives like early access. On the other hand, many season passes such as Battlefields and Call of Duties don't detail exactly what's in them. You're simply expected to hand over your money in the good faith that the developer will deliver something you'll enjoy. With season passes in multiplayer games, you also need to consider the previously mentioned multiplayer expansion caveats, such as the number of people with the DLC and how early you bought it. For this reason, it might seem like you need to purchase the season pass up front so that you can get the most use out of it, but you run the risk of paying for content you won't enjoy. You could always wait until the season pass is detailed and pick it up later. The problem with this is, if the player base has already moved on from the earlier expansions, getting a discount doesn't count for much if not all the content is usable. There are a few exceptions though. For example, Call of Duty's DLC has been very predictable over the last few years, so it could be safe to assume what's going to be included in each expansion. Therefore, buying a season pass early can make sense for die-hard fans who know they'll still be playing more than 12 months down the line. I'm guessing this is a relatively small group of people though, and if you're new to Call of Duty or any other franchise, picking up a season pass can be a risky move. With single-player season passes, it's a little more straightforward. It definitely makes sense to wait until all the content has been detailed, and if you have the willpower, it's also worth waiting for a sale, because unlike multiplayer content, it doesn't matter when you get it, and sometimes you can grab a great deal. The single worst value for money DLC you can buy though is any kind of loot box with randomized content. Unfortunately, these systems are becoming increasingly common, and while they promise a lot, they statistically deliver very little. Overwatch's loot crates, for example, seem harmless enough until you start spending real money. $6.75 in Australia, for example, gets you 5 crates and theoretically 20 chances to get that sweet limited edition Genji skin you've been aching for. Depending on the item's rarity though, it's more likely you'll end up with this. In fact, the likelihood of turning up decent or rare items in some games has been proven to be so slim that it can almost feel like winning the lottery.
That's what I'm talking about, another damn win. Fuck yeah.
Loot boxes, loot crates, supply drops and card systems are as close to gambling as legally possible in a non-gambling game, and a guaranteed way to throw away your money. Now this brings me to pricing. Most of the time it's hard to know if DLC is good value without having played it. A good rule of thumb is to try and determine the additional number of hours of game time it provides. For example, if a single player expansion costs a quarter of the game's initial price, and provides at least a quarter of the original playtime, this is probably a sign that it's a good deal. Map packs and multiplayer add-ons such as new weapons, vehicles and characters are much harder to gauge though. A new gun in your favourite shooter, for example, may revive your interest and keep you playing for many hours longer, but a new skin, such as the car skins in Rocket League, might only amuse you for an hour or so. This is another reason why microtransactions are risky. That Snoop Dogg sound pack might seem like a great idea at the time, but after a few minutes you'll realise that you've been duped. The biggest issue with DLC purchases, particularly microtransactions, is that they are often designed as impulse purchases. Games often suggest them at the moment you're most likely to buy, so it can be easy to drop cash on something shiny in the spur of the moment without giving it much thought. My advice when buying any kind of DLC is to do your research first. Find out what's included, how many hours of additional gameplay it adds, and also what others think about it. Chances are that after you've had a bit of time to consider it, it may not seem as attractive as you first thought. Anyway, that's my 2 cents. If you have any thoughts on DLC, I'd love to hear them in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, drop me a like, and if you're new to the channel, subscribe for more content like this. But otherwise, thanks for watching.